Bonjour, Wache, Anin. Welcome to Lakehead University's recognition of National Indigenous Veterans Day. Thank you to each and every one of you who are joining us today. Denise Baxter, Indigneous, Makwadodam, Martin Falls, and Donjaba. My name is Denise Baxter, Vice Provo Indigenous Initiatives at Lakehead University, and I will be your MC for the event today. Lakehead University respectfully acknowledges its campuses are located on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. Lakehead Thunder Bay is located on the traditional lands of Fort William First Nation and Amkiwaju, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. Lakehead Aurelia is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Lakehead University acknowledges the history that many nations hold in the areas around our campuses and is committed to a relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples based on the principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in the spirit of reconciliation. Lakehead University remains committed to social justice and social responsibility. We continue to advance the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls for action and Universities Canada principles on Indigenous education. Before we begin, I would like to share an important notice of video and photo recording for this event of the National Indigenous Veterans Day. Participants are reminded that this event is being recorded, and we are doing this to preserve a record of the event in the university's archives and to publicize and promote Lakehead University. By attending, you are agreeing to be included in the recording and its public dissemination in any media now known or later developed anywhere in the world in perpetuity. That's a mouthful. Just a little note, we do have coffee and tea, which we'll be serving after our event today. And for the guest speakers, I have water here behind the stage. So I would just like to thank you all for being here today. Now on with the more formal part of our presentation, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Elder Jerry Martin from Outagamie First Nation, who will share our opening today. Elder Martin, welcome.
Bonjour, Wache, Shego, greetings. A special hello for my brothers and sisters in arms and the families that supported us during our time of service. I look around the crowd and I see fewer and fewer each year, and that's to be expected. I always had a hard time with this Remembrance Day thing because I remember it in the early 50s. I was just a young boy living with my mom in Ottawa and seeing, I think 2 or 3 regiments march out of the drill hall down the canal driveway to where the train station was around the back. And then that's where the families left and departed to the soldiers getting on there, maybe over 1,000. Marched really smartly down the street with the bands and all that. But I was too young to understand what was going on. They were shipping out to Korea, the Korean conflict, and then it's later on learning that not all of them come back. I was SB 189441, former Gunner Martin GV, late of the 3 RCHA and the 1st Locating Battery of the Royal Canadian Artillery. From 1966 till February 1970. And I was one of the guinea pigs that was used in gas warfare trials in Alberta at Suffield. That was a secret thing. No, not many people in Canada knew about it. Like in all war games, it's always by accident, but we lose people. And we lost 2 in our 2-week trials out there. Unfortunate. A young trooper with the tanks slept outside the tank underneath the front. It was raining hard all night and it sunk into the ground and crushed him. The other one was a young man who was sleeping in his truck, 3/4-ton trucks. And you know how the vents out sideways. And the guy beside him got cold and turned his truck on, turned his heaters on, and fell asleep. So the one that was in beside him got gassed to death. Stupid things like that. Everybody knows it, and it's unfortunate. Most of us sort of remember when we lose our innocence about what we are doing in the armed forces. And over the years, I've had about 2 or 3 occasions to stand as an honor guard for Legionnaires. And they're old, and you hardly see any more now on Remembrance Day on TV. Most of them have passed on, walked on to the spirit world, but we still remember them. I've had the pleasure to sit there with them at the Legion, and you know, we get into talking about what you did in the service. Always felt sorry for them because they would start crying. They remember, and you can't ever forget it. And that's what people don't understand. When you sign up and you do these live fire exercises, and we were used as guinea pigs for gas warfare, that's real stuff. And it hurts, and it's hard to breathe, and it affects your respiratory system the rest of your life and your nerves. I don't regret serving my country, and I do mean my country, Canada. Many of us Nishnabik young men and women, we were exempt from conscription, but we still volunteered anyways. And went across the pond and served in the Second World War in the European theater. Some went to the Pacific Theater. I know a few in Winnipeg that were part of that Baton Peninsula March. They were never the same after that either. And I think, like all families, when you're away from your family, you pray for them and they pray for you. And you miss your homeland, whether it's on the prairies, on the East Coast or West Coast, or Northern Ontario, and all our snow that's going to be coming soon, mosquitoes. It's a beautiful land. And everyone that I know that got posted overseas, that's what they said after about 2 weeks, they started thinking about home. I have to excuse my sniffling, but it's got this darn virus a couple of weeks ago. It's still hanging around. And most of us thought it was a good idea to go in the military, like our fathers did and grandfathers did in the First World War. So, excuse me. I don't have to tell that to my brothers and sisters in arms about that feeling of loneliness, that feeling I just want to get home alive in one piece. And for the families praying for their loved one, that no harm would come to them, that they won't get injured or hurt or killed. I don't know how many of you been in live fire battles, simulated battles. And if you ever hear a 155 or a 105 howitzer go off and you're on that, it scares the bejeebers out of you. And when you're finished, you say, hey, that's it. Artilleryman's joke, because your hearing gets shot. But I've been at both ends, firing the guns as well as being in the, because I was smart, I got to be a tech assist. We're the ones that fought the shots. We didn't have computers then, we just had bright minds. And it's scary. And then you look at the damage that it can do, and they talk about Hassan and some of the others in the eastern Mediterranean countries that are using gas warfare and smart bombs and these drones now. We had drones. We pioneered the technology for it and then shared it with the Americans. And they made those smart missiles. And when you see the damage that they can do, and you see the pictures and the videos of villages and homes and people being torn up, scared. And when I left the military, I kept thinking about the War Museum in Shiloh. They have a museum there with so many pieces of artillery from way back in the 1800s, right forward to where we are today. And you marvel at it first, and then you think about it. Why do we human beings make war on each other? Why do we have so many casualties, both collaborative and for our soldiers and military people? And I think the biggest injury to all of us is that loss of innocence. It was worth it, but I wouldn't do it again. And then again, a part of me says, yeah, I would, to protect this country, my family, other families, doing what we think is right. So at this time of the year, it's always kind of sad, but I'm learning a little bit more about post-traumatic stress syndrome. Because it makes me sad that we lost many people, conflict. I really feel sorry for the merchant marine guys, because they weren't really military, but they were out there on the ships and they got blown up and shot at. And I'm glad that at least here in Thunder Bay, they have a memorial for them to remember it. But I was a young man then. I was only 17 in 1966. And we were young and impressionable and wanted to do what was right. And we were fresh after the Second World War in Korea. So we did it. And for us Nish, we just wanted to show them, I know how to shoot. I can hunt. Just give me a good rifle and I'll show you. Many of us Nish were sharpshooters, if you want to call it. And crawling around the bush and through the forest, nothing is like chasing a deer or moose. Sleeping out on the ground under a lean-to, it's like being out in your hunting ground, trapping and living off the land. Wasn't so hard. All these memories, and each one of you that served, you've got your own memories. And we thank God, the Creator, the deity, that we made it through. We're still alive. And hope that this country and the world doesn't see another major war of the world. Have we not learned yet to live in peace? Because that's what our Nish commandment is, to live in peace and harmony with all of creation. All of creation. We're not at war with nature, or shouldn't be at war with any other human race and tribe. And when you see the veterans, both peacetime and war, this time of the year is hard. I know I buried a couple, my buddies. And it's just something you carry with you. And I don't think people in Canada and the public really understand what has been lost. But for the families, they remember, they hear grandpa or maybe grandma crying about it still. Their buddies and chums they lost. So let's pledge ourselves to live in peace and harmony with all of creation. Let's not be so quick to go to war. And, that's like a little boy when they want to fight each other. That hurts. And it is against our culture and our law of the land. We welcome people into this country from other lands. They bring their conflict with them sometimes. Their post-traumatic stress lives on through them, and they got to learn to live in peace, harmony, because we have a beautiful country, and it's worth defending and keeping it free and beautiful. And thanks to all the veterans, both peacetime and war, brothers and sisters, that gave up their time and their lives, and the ones that didn't come back, who died either through unfortunate accidents or in battle, and they never found their peace again. So there's a price to be paid for that. And I hope we keep electing not the bad politicians, but the politicians that want to keep us free and out of those conflicts and make Canada, keep Canada strong and free. And always remember the veterans, the both, that are above ground and those that are buried in the veterans' plots in these cemeteries around the country. Think of good thoughts, put a little tobacco on the ground and say prayers for them. Their spirit is at peace, I hope. So I'm not going to ramble on anymore, except ask the Creator to bless us, keep us well, to remember all of them that gave something of themselves, that innocence, and teach our children to live in peace and get along with one another, brotherly love and harmony. So with that, I'm going to leave it and say, Miigwech Kichimena to Kanagamin of Kamgikisha, Shomazak Nakomazak Minwa Benojin Moshe Abanojin. I thank the Creator for the good life that we can live, for all the things that we've been given, and try to have a good day. Toast those that you know that serve. Excuse me. Once my nose starts running, the damn thing doesn't stop. And I don't want to stick, cleaning up my nose and walk around like that. So thank you for coming out, sharing your views and your words. I know there's guest speakers. So, miigwech kichimenatu. And thank you for all those that served and are still serving. And may we find peace and harmony in the spirit world after here. Min waki wapmin. Pamapi. See you again.
Miigwech Elder Martin for sharing your memories, your stories and your sentiments and your thoughts and wishes as you opened us today. So I would now like to introduce Dr. David Barnett. Dr. Barnett is the Provost and Vice President here at Lakehead University, responsible for the academic portfolio. Welcome, Dr. Barnett.
Thank you, Denise. Appreciate that. Bonjour, Wache, Anine, welcome. And it seems like it's really close to me here, so I'm going to move it back a little bit here. So welcome and thank you, Elder Martin, for your opening today. Elder Martin does many openings for us today. That has to be one of the most moving ones. So thank you for sharing from the heart today. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone as we pay tribute to the important contributions and sacrifices made by First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people in service. I extend a warm welcome to Councillor Michelle Solomon, the Fort William First Nation, Métis veteran Carrie McLaughlin, President Wendy Houston of the Thunder Bay and District Métis Council, Councillor Jim Bowles of Red Sky Métis Independent Nation, Michael DeYoung, curator, archivist with the Thunder Bay Museum, Elaine Joseph, acting manager of Indigenous Relations with the City of Thunder Bay, Sailor First Class Luke Gillis from the Royal Canadian Navy, Dr. Michelle Beaulieu, Honorary Colonel of the Lake Superior Scottish Regiment, and Farhan Youssef, Executive Director of Lakehead University Student Union. November 8th is Indigenous Veterans Day, a day where we remember and commemorate the contributions of Indigenous veterans in the First and Second World Wars, of the Korean War, and conflicts and peacekeeping missions. We express our gratitude to them and their families for their service and their sacrifice. In 1994, National Aboriginal Veterans Day began in the city of Winnipeg when Indigenous veterans were not recognized in Remembrance Day ceremonies. Now, many cities across Canada recognize this important day. Over 12,000 Indigenous people are estimated to have volunteered in all three wars, and over 2,700 Indigenous people are in active service today. As First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people were not considered citizens of Canada, they were not eligible for conscription in the First World War. Despite this, many volunteers faced considerable challenges, which included traveling long distances, learning a new language, and coping with racism. Many soldiers returned home only to find that the policies of enfranchisement under the Indian Act resulted in their loss of identity as status Indian, received no benefits, and many had their reserve land sold to the Soldier Settlement Board, thereby reducing the size of the First Nation community. First Nation, Métis, and Inuit soldiers brought unique skills and attributes to their service in the armed forces, including tracking, such as Private Joseph Delaron from Nipigon Red Sky Métis Independent Nation, who was awarded a military medal, as well as Thomas Godcher from Long Lake, who was awarded for his scouting skills and bravery. The Ballinger brothers, Peter and Augustin from Fort William First Nation, who enlisted in World War I and were awarded military medals for crossing multiple miles to deliver messages. The code talkers, such as Charles Checker Tompkins of the Métis Nation, who is fluent in the Cree language, had significant impacts on the wars. Others like Edith Anderson Montour, a young woman from the Six Nations Grand River Reserve in Ontario, served as a nurse in World War I. Many served with distinction, winning medals for bravery in action and giving their lives in service. The exhibit that you see here today is the Indigenous Veterans of Treaty 3 project developed back in 2018 by Fort Frances Museum and the Cultural Center, Kenachiwanang Historical Center, and Glenn Jourdain of Couchiching, whose research and photos laid the foundation of this project and who unfortunately passed away in July of 2021. This exhibit was curated in the spirit of collaboration and reconciliation and shared the triumphs and sometimes shocking realities faced by Indigenous veterans across Canada, and specifically those from Treaty 3. With a specific focus on World War I and World War II, including other wars to the present day, this exhibit highlights specific veterans, their triumphs, setbacks, Indigenous and women's roles in mixing Indigenous and military culture, and honors those who came home and those who did not. This is a growing exhibit. When it started, it began with around 100 names of veterans and now has grown to 324. The Thunder Bay Museum has curated an additional part of the display to recognize First Nation and Métis veterans from the Robinson Superior Treaty area who had also served. So a special thanks to Fort Frances Museum and Cultural Center and Kenachiwanang Historical Center, Thunder Bay's Museum, and the City of Thunder Bay and Métis Nation of Ontario for loaning Lakehead University these displays. We are honored to have you all join us today, and I encourage you to take the time to explore this exhibit this week. Miigwech, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Burnett. And again, to echo the thanks of everyone who contributed to the exhibit and everyone who's able to join us here today. It is now my pleasure to welcome Councillor Michelle Solomon, who is a member and elected councillor for Fort William First Nation. I welcome Michelle.
Good afternoon. Ani Boju. Oshki Mekana Ikwe, Dejnakos and Manijo Gijigo Queensas Dejnakos. I'm Michelle Solomon, as I've been introduced by Denise, and I'm here to bring greetings on behalf of Fort William First Nation and to share a few sentiments of my own on this commemorative day today, November 8th, acknowledging Indigenous veterans. I'd like to first say thank you to Elder Jerry for, bringing that real life experience of serving to all of us today. For those of us who have not had that personal knowledge or personal experience, sometimes I think that that distance from it can, you don't necessarily have the connection. So I appreciate you bringing that to this conversation today. And I also want to acknowledge all the other dignitaries and guests that have come here today to bring words of significance to them that they would like to impart on you as well. I really feel that Dr. Barnett summed up very well, how we came to celebrate this day in advance of Remembrance Day. Acknowledging the vital role that Indigenous people played in serving and defending this country, Canada. And so I'm not going to go into all of that history, but I think what is important for me to acknowledge today is what that experience, when we speak of enfranchisement. So for those Indigenous people who served and after serving, they were disenfranchised. And what that means is that they no longer belonged to their community. So, and when I say that, I'm speaking specifically to First Nation people. And I can speak for my own grandfather on my paternal side and his brothers. After serving, you come back to your country and you're no longer a member of that First Nation. You're no longer considered an Indian under the Indian Act. So you can imagine how, that's just one aspect of the Indian Act. And that's just one aspect of our lived experience as Indigenous people, our colonized experience. That's just one little piece of it that speaks to how we were removed from our communities and removed from our homelands and how we no longer belonged. And you can imagine how that trickled down to future generations and actually, changes continue to happen to try and correct the injustices that happened through the Indian Act over the years. But I think that, that not belonging is really needs to be echoed. So I also want to take a moment to acknowledge all those who served, all those who are still in service. And I want to acknowledge the family members and loved ones of those who served, and particularly those who lived additional stressors and traumas because of this not belonging anymore. The impact that had on your family and your loved one who served. So, and I guess I also want to say how grateful I am that Lakehead University has taken up the responsibility to have this exhibit here today, so that we can come together and acknowledge this day in such a powerful way and bring this message to those who are participating and those who can come and have a personal look at this amazing exhibit. So I thank you for that work and for taking this on. And I also, of course, want to say that there will be a Remembrance Day event service at NMK Waju on Friday. So I just want to say Chi Miigwech for having me here today. And it's my great honor to be here on behalf of the Council of Fort William First Nation and the people of Fort William First Nation to welcome you to our traditional territory. Miigwech.
Okay, yeah. Miigwech, Councillor Solomon. And thank you for giving us a little more insight into enfranchisement and the impact that it had not only on your own family, but on other First Nations veterans across the country. So it is now my pleasure to welcome Métis veteran Carrie McLaughlin, who will be joining us to share a few words. Welcome.
Bonjour, Sego Ani. I'm part of the forgotten people of Canada, the Hudson Bay people, the half-breed, the Métis. My roots are Red River Colony. My great-grandfather, Edmond Saint Germain, or Tom as he was known, he got drunk one night and got together with a bunch of his friends. Tom was 40 years old and they all signed up to join World War I. His friends didn't make it, but Tom did, and left behind a blended family and went missing in the Battle of Ypres in 1916 and never came back. My father served with the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, went AWOL 3 times. If he had not gone the 3rd time, he would have joined the Grenadiers and been taken prisoner of war in Hong Kong. And I'm a Toon. That's what they call reservists, Toons. And I joined the Canadian Armed Forces in honor of my great-grandfather, Edmond Saint Germain, and my father. I'm a prairie chicken. I come from Manitoba. And we, like many Indigenous people, we're migratory. We follow the herd, the buffalo. We're harvesters. But we're people very close to the land and believing in protecting the land. Not just Turtle Island, but the land across the pond. There are many Indigenous people throughout this global village. The Sami of the northern part of Finland, the Aborigines, the Maoris, the Aztecs. That word Indigenous means people from different cultures and climates. But having been part of Thunder Bay for the last 20 plus years, and being part of the armory, I joined as a military chaplain. I served the service battalion, then being in brigade, and it would be an injustice to acknowledge that Captain Chung, who was over in Iraq, who just lost his life in a non-operational incident, to remember him and his family. And I think of being a Manitoban, I think of Tommy Prince and his brother, one of the most highly decorated First Nation gentlemen, along with his brother, who served both in World War II. To show you the ingenious, natural way of doing things, Tommy was a spotter. He was what they call a FOO, a forward observation officer. And the phone line got damaged. So Tommy put on some clothes and grabbed a hoe and went to go garden. He attached the wires, which gave him the ability to tell where to lob those 105s. And thank you, Elder Jerry Martin, for your words. And sure enough, he was spot on. Tommy would go missing for 3 days and get jacked up by his commanding officer, but he'd bring back good intel. He'd bring back German prisoners, and they said, just let Tommy do what Tommy does. But the regret was Tommy also became a street person of the city of Winnipeg. He was forgotten about. And he was interviewed and they said, you know, we have all this that we can give you. He says, I'm a working man. I may struggle with alcohol, but I am a proud member of the Blood Vein First Nation, and I don't look out for handouts. I'm a working man. I fought for my country along with my brother and other Indigenous men and women because we chose to, not because we had to. We chose to. His great niece went to the 2nd Patricia Canadian Light Infantry and said that Tommy had died, and they gave him a proper military burial with all honors. And as Councilman Solomon said, how many Indigenous soldiers came back? Were disenfranchised, were forgotten about, were no longer called Canadians because of our ancestry, whether blood or through adoption, through being blended families. So when we as Métis use that word, the forgotten people, or the road allowance people is another expression that is often used, that where we were forgotten, we came back. But it's the story of our elders, of the veterans. And I know one elder one time invited me, and I close with this, and I gave him some tobacco, and then we sat for I don't know how long. He had made some tea in Bannock. He didn't say a lot to me. But what he did say is, when the eagle flies high in the sky, that messenger bird of love, that eagle's taking our prayers to the Creator. So my prayers go for all the fallen and their families who still mourn their loss, and for all our men, women, irregardless of their orientation, who are serving now. There is blight upon the Canadian Armed Forces when people of same gender were ousted out of the Canadian, were called a variety of names which were inappropriate because of their beliefs, because of who they are. Now the rights have been rewritten. I struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder because of my service. Walking wounded, but knocked down, not knocked down, but walking humbly. As the Creator speaks to us today to remember all those on National Indigenous Veterans Day, remember this: we are the people of the land of Mother Earth. And remember to pray for those who have fallen, who've given their utmost. Or if you go to visit one of the cemeteries and you happen to be by a gravestone of a veteran, put some tobacco down to pray for them and their families. Miigwech, miigwech. Thank you.
Marcy Cho, that was really appreciated. Thank you for sharing those stories. I'm going to move on. I'm feeling a little emotional here as I'm listening to all this talk. I'd like to introduce one of our active service people, Sailor First Class Luke Gillis, who is serving with the Royal Canadian Navy. And we had a chance to chat prior to the service. He has sailed all through the Northwest Pass, down through the Panama Canal, really all the way around Turtle Island. And so we're really, really pleased that he's able to join us today. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I am Sailor First Class Gillis. I'm a naval communicator with His Majesty's Royal Canadian Navy. I have been serving ever since 2016, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to join you today and take the chance and take some time to remember those soldiers, sailors, and aviators who have come before. Those are the people who served and sacrificed in the name of freedom, peace, and equality, who bravely stood their ground and to fight for human right and their own and the rights of others, who have overcome unbeatable odds to secure victories for Canada and her allies. I would like to talk a little bit about my career and my experiences as well to bring them to this event. So, when I sailed with HMCS Harry DeWolf, who is associated with the Stampai, Kittatinny region of Nunavut, we went up to the Arctic and we talked to those people, those northern people, the Inuit, and they taught me some very valuable lessons. stuff that I'm going to be carrying with me for the rest of my life. They told me their stories about how their communities were established, some bad, a lot bad, but this is stuff that we can all work together as a family to fix. This is stuff that I am proud to say that when we go up there, we make a difference. Stuff, Grease Fjord, when we were up there, we helped restore the community fridges so they can hunt whale once again. When we visit all these other communities, we help with local events. We have done some seriously amazing stuff, and I'm very proud to have served and continue to serve with the Royal Canadian Navy. It is very emotional for me to remember these things. This deployment that I have gone on, circumnavigating Turtle Island, was something that I'm going to be holding with for the rest of my life, and I'm going to continue to serve and continue to push forward to promote Canadian values and togetherness, family. That is what we are. I'd also like to speak to some heroes that serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, some Indigenous, some Chinese Canadian, everybody. We're all one large family in the Canadian Armed Forces. That's one thing I am truly value and truly proud to have said. Wrong way. Apologies. This clicker is off. There we are. These stories include people like Corporal Benjamin Miller, who left Newfoundland to join and fight for peace in Europe during World War II, along with many other peoples and communities. Joining Canada, individuals from Alberta, in Nunavut, the Yukon, all these different peoples together fighting for peace and equality. Continue on, we have airmen like Tommy Wong, a Chinese Canadian from Richmond, BC, who joined the Royal Canadian Air Force in World War II and was the first Chinese Canadian to serve in the Canadian Air Force. We have French Canadian Leo Major, who also served in World War II and the Korean War, a brave hero. He has done many hero acts along with many other members of the Canadian Armed Forces. In addition to that, we have sailors like, excuse me, sorry. No, we have sailors just like Ted, apologies, I'm losing my place here. Ted Jameson, an Indigenous Canadian Armed Forces member from the Six Nations Upper Cajun Band, helped patrol the coasts during the Korean War, serving aboard HMCS Haida, later continuing on to promote and be a leader in anti-submarine warfare in the Canadian Armed Forces. He served in World War II aboard the Iroquois and was one of the most brave people I want to remember. It's amazing seeing these individuals who are a part of the Canadian Armed Forces, something I'm proud to continue on and proud to push forward through and continue on this great legacy. These peoples are heroes and people that I look up to every single day in my service. After the Korean War, Canada pushed through and we continue on with peacekeeping, something that every single member of the Armed Forces is very proud to have said and done, promoting peace and security throughout the world, helping people out, making a real difference with humanitarian aid. It's very important that we continue on that great work and continue promoting peace and prosperity, not only in Canada, but throughout the entire world. Many Canadians also served in the Gulf War, doing patrols and surveillance. Canadians such as, apologies. Sorry. Lynette Doucette, who served in the Gulf War and amazing service, continue on the great legacy of the Canadian heroes. Moving on to our local community, we have the 3 servicemen who served in Afghanistan and sadly perished in their service. Their astounding work and heroism helped promote and protect Canada and pushed forward to a better future. These are Corporal Anthony Bonnet, Private Robert Costell, and Private Josh Kaluki. They all served and perished in Afghanistan. Today, the Canadian Armed Forces continues on to push through and promote security and peace throughout the world and humanitarian efforts, as well as operations to support local communities. Operations that I helped participate in up in the Arctic, something that I'm incredibly proud to have done and will continue to do. I really hope these relationships continue and that everything just works out. Apologies, I'm not that good at public speaking, but all your smiling faces really help support me. And thank you very much. That's all I have to say today. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Miigwech, Sailor First Class Luke Gillis. It is really nice to hear from a young person who's actually serving at this time. And it just reminds us that this legacy continues forward and you're the next generation. And maybe some of the younger people in the audience may be following in your footsteps. It is now my pleasure to introduce Wendy Houston. Wendy is president of the Thunder Bay and District Métis Council. And as usual, she wears many, many hats out in the community. And so we're deeply appreciative that you're able to be with us here today. Welcome.
Hello, Tansy, and greetings. As Denise said, my name is Wendy Houston, and I am president of the Thunder Bay and District Métis Council for the Métis Nation of Ontario. Firstly, I would like to thank Lakehead University for inviting me to share and expressing my gratitude on Indigenous Veterans Day as we continue to work to build meaningful relationships and partnerships with the Thunder Bay community and proudly salute our Métis, First Nations, and Inuit servicemen and women. In our era of reconciliation, honoring the contributions and sacrifices of these brave veterans is key to greater understanding and healing. The Métis are sometimes referred to as, our elder Carrie said, the forgotten people. Therefore, events like today are so significant as they give a voice to our veterans and ensure their stories and legacies will be remembered. The Métis in Ontario have a long and proud tradition of military service in Canada, and our involvement in the defense of Canada began before there was a Canada in the War of 1812. Métis have also served in both World Wars, the Korean conflict, in Afghanistan, and in peacekeeping missions around the globe. So Métis people continue to play an important role in the forces and serve our nation proudly, both at home and abroad. Today, we must also remember that the experiences of many Indigenous veterans occurred when they returned home from the field. There is an unfortunate history of neglect in responding to the needs of these returning Métis veterans and Indigenous veterans on whole, as many struggled with reintegration into the civilian life and experienced difficulties in assessing the supports and services they needed and their family as well. After the World War II, our Métis warriors were discharged to enter their previous lives and to raise their families, often in difficult conditions, without the knowledge that the federal government were assisting non-Indigenous veterans with educational, financial help, assistance, farmland purchases, grants, loans, and other aid. Although many decades later, we are pleased that a formal apology was issued by Canada in 2019, along with the compensation to surviving Métis veterans and other Indigenous veterans, and with the funds set aside for commemorative programs and services to keep their legacy alive for future generations. Today, we are reminded that our democracies, both Métis and Canadian, are built on the service, sacrifice, and dedication of Métis veterans, women and men, who have all served us all so well. I again thank our hosts for organizing this event, Denise and Lakehead University, and I extend my sincere gratitude to all Indigenous people who have served and continue to serve. We owe them a debt that can never be repaid. Thank you and merci.
Marcicho. Oh, so nice to see you again. It's been probably a month, so it's wonderful to see you again. And I would like to introduce another guest that we have from the region. Jim Bowles, who is a counselor for the Red Sky Métis Independent Nation, is joining us today. So I'd like to welcome Councillor Bowles.
Bonjour, Ani. I'm Jim Bowles. I'm a elder and a healer for Red Sky Métis Independent Nation. And I have relatives on both sides, the Métis side and First Nation side, from all the reserves in Robertson Superior. So I'm familiar with how many of my ancestors fought in the First World War, the Second World War, and even in the War of 1812, we have ancestors that fought there, and even in the Korean War. But a little known fact, there were over 40,000 Canadians went south and fought in Vietnam, joined the American Army. I knew two Métis people. I forget their names because it was just in passing. And I have no idea how many First Nations or how many Métis people joined the US Army to fight in Vietnam. And the memorial, the war memorial they have, I don't even know if the Canadians are listed on that. I've never been to Washington to see the names down there. And I had lots of American friends who died in Vietnam and a lot who came back and were never the same. So all these conflicts, even as peacekeepers, it was so traumatic what was happening. You don't know what it's like to have somebody shooting at you or shoot back at somebody and really, have to kill somebody, which is really against our nature. If you think of the 7 grandfather teachings, killing is not one of them, unless it's for food. And, I get really emotional, and at this time here is really bad. But it should be offering tobacco every night and prayers for the fallen and for the ones who have survived and have to live with such awful memories. If you're visiting the cemetery, make sure you visit an ancestor. Be sure to put tobacco and do a prayer. It's so important that we don't forget. I wish Canada would put up memorials in every area naming all these people the Indigenous people who fought and died in all the conflicts around the world. There's really nothing. It's only recent history that we're even being remembered that we were there. It's really difficult sometimes to even think about this. And PSD was not even thought of back during the Second World War or Korea. That's something that they've diagnosed recently. And how many people suffered for years and years. I know I have ancestors, we talked, and they had a hard time and they didn't understand. So it's never going to go away. It's always with you. All these memories that they've had, and if they've shared with you, then they're part of you, and how they suffered. It's unimaginable for people who never been there. And I just want to take this time to thank everybody for remembering and being close to everyone here, because we all share a common denominator. And we all have family, relatives, ancestors who served their country and served it with pride. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Councillor Bowles, for sharing those words, your thoughts, and certainly the memories. It is now my pleasure to introduce Michael DeYoung, who is the curator and archivist with the Thunder Bay Museum and one of our partners for this exhibit. Welcome, Michael.
My name is Michael DeYoung, and I'm the curator and archivist with the Thunder Bay Museum. I'd like to start by expressing our appreciation for the invitation to contribute to recognizing the contributions of Indigenous veterans in this way. It is an honor. I'd also like to recognize that in producing our exhibit content, we partnered with the Thunder Bay Military Museum, where director Captain George Romick has been collecting photographs and stories of Indigenous veterans for many years. Between our two institutions, we were able to highlight the stories of 7 Indigenous veterans, if briefly. But for each of these, there are many more whose stories need to be told. We hope in the coming years to continually improve our collections to reflect and document those individuals, while recognizing that ultimately the stories within do not belong to us. Echoing the words in the exhibit, it's important to remember all those who have served in the past and also recognize those who still serve today. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Canada's armed forces. They serve bravely, earning numerous decorations while often facing prejudice from fellow soldiers and Canadian society as a whole. Some have made the ultimate sacrifice and perished in battle. Others served honorably during times of conflict and continued life afterwards, while being affected by the many tolls of military service. Some forgotten about and not given the due that was theirs. It's imperative on us to remember and honor their sacrifice. In closing, I'd like to once again thank Lakehead University for the invitation to play a small role in this commemoration, to thank Captain Romick, who could not be here today, for his considerable assistance, and recognize our exhibit's curator, Sydney Balouse, for assisting with the creative process for our exhibit panels. Thank you, merci, and miigwech.
Thank you so much. And to your team at the Thunder Bay Museum, a deep expression of our thanks as well for contributing to this and allowing us to share with the Lakehead community and the wider city of Thunder Bay the important work. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michel Beaulieu. He is an honorary colonel of the Lake Superior Scottish Regiment and has another hat during the day of Associate Vice Provost Academic Special Projects. So welcome, Michel.
Thank you, Denise. Hello, bonjour, bonjour, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces. As you can tell, I'm recovering from a cold, just like Elder Martin is, so you're not going to hear my normal voice. But as Denise had mentioned, I'm the honorary colonel of the Lake Superior Scottish Regiment. Honorary colonels are tasked with fostering esprit de corps, serve as ambassadors to the public, and are the guardians of regimental traditions and history, promoting the regiment's identity and ethos, and being an advisor to the commanding officer. For over a century, First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples have served the Canadian Armed Forces. Over 12,000 served in the First and Second World Wars, the Korean War, the war in Afghanistan, and hundreds of individuals continue to do so proudly today. As part of Veterans Week, today is a day set aside to recognize and acknowledge the many contributions and sacrifices of Indigenous peoples, not only to Canada's war efforts, but its peacekeeping reputation and also domestic operations. The history found in this exhibit is part of that shared history. Knowing this is also part of our shared future. It has been estimated that those who chose, and this has been a theme today that's really important, worth mentioning, who chose to serve in the First World War, chose to leave their traditional lands, achieved the most honors per capita in Canada during that time. The most Canadians are unaware of the fact thousands of Indigenous men and women from across Canada enlisted to fight in the Second World War, both status and non-status. Thousands more Métis also enlisted. The contribution made by the various peoples in Northwestern Ontario directly reflects the national contribution. This exhibit tells the story of some of those individuals, but not all. There are so many more to be told. What is also important to recognize today is that those peoples who did fight did not have the same rights as others who served. For example, and this is worth repeating, federal law prohibited Indigenous peoples from having the vote, and as a result, thousands of Indigenous veterans that had fought to stem this tide of tyranny and dictatorship found themselves without a voice once they returned to Canada, unless they gave up their status, something that was not changed until the 1st of July, 1953. They were also the only group in Canada determined to be ineligible for the Veterans Land Act benefits. Now, deciding to give up status rights would affect not only them individually, but also the descendants and their communities. Compounding the issues were also internal conflicts between the Government of Canada and its ministries at the end of the Second World War. As a result, most veterans were unaware of or unable to access the benefits that should have been made available to them. Now, to their credit, many fellow soldiers from the regiments raised in Northwestern Ontario, including my own, the Lake Spear Scottish Regiment, voiced their consternation to commanding officers, city and town officials, and members of Parliament. Unfortunately, at that time, it often fell on deaf ears. Many Indigenous veterans in Northwestern Ontario would take up leadership roles in the years to come in their communities after the Second World War and spearheaded social and political movements. They were leaders in their communities. After decades, and I do mean decades of petitions, it was not until 2002 that the federal government offered redress packages to Indigenous veterans, and it wasn't until 2004 that this was extended to Métis and non-status. This history is part of that shared history, and knowing this is also part of our shared future. It's important. Today, just under 4% of the Canadian Armed Forces is of First Nation descent, representing many distinct cultures from sea to sea to sea. Thousands more are Métis. They continue to make Canada proud to their service at home and abroad. Now, today is also a day of reaffirmation of the Canadian Armed Forces reconciliation priorities, which includes engaging with Indigenous communities and learning from them across Canada through a variety of programs and activities. Two recent examples many of you were engaged in and involved with that deserve highlighting include the National Indigenous Youth Leadership Program, Eagle's Nest, which in 2018 was hosted by Fort William First Nation. This past year, the Lake Superior Patrol Competition was also hosted by Fort William First Nation. These and other initiatives, such as the National Bold Eagle Program, are intended to foster and enhance existing bonds between communities and the Canadian Armed Forces, but I think more importantly, for those within the Canadian Armed Forces to learn. Lastly, today is also about making efforts to better understand, through initiatives such as this exhibit, that the role of Indigenous veterans have played, continue to play in Canada, and also expressing our heartfelt gratitude. So thank you, Merci Miigwech, for this invitation, and please do have a look at the exhibit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beaulieu. I neglected to mention, but he is also a faculty member in the history department. So we got, I think, a little bit of maybe a piece of what a lecture would be as well. So I appreciate the short lecture and a little bit of learning that went along with it. It is now my pleasure to welcome Alain Joseph, who is the acting manager of the Indigenous Relations branch or department with the City of Thunder Bay. Welcome, Alain.
Bonjour, Anine. Bonjour, hello. I'd like to start by extending a special miigwech and merci to all of the veterans with us today. Thank you so much for your service. By deciding to join up, you showed great courage and allyship to your fellow Canadians and to our allies across the globe. And that's what I'd like to speak about today, being an ally. How being an ally is defined has broadened recently to mean treating others with the dignity they deserve by standing up for them, standing by them, and amplifying their voice when it needs to be heard. Being an ally means doing the right thing, and to me personally, being a good neighbor to others in our community. Whether at war or in our own communities, there are struggles that we deal with every day. On the battlefield, an ally might shore up your flank or provide you with a timely resupply. They're there to help you get over a difficult objective. This time of year can be particularly difficult for people in our community. As autumn fades into winter, so does the light. And for some, it's hard to keep the darkness from creeping in. Perhaps you know someone who is far away from their home. Be an ally and reach out to your friends, your fellow classmates, and your neighbors. Bring some light into their lives. The last few months have been particularly challenging for folks who live precariously. We've seen reports of increased use of food banks as the cost of food goes up, and no doubt there are some who are on the edge of homelessness. Be an ally and find a place or time where you can help lift someone up. There are causes across our community that are worth fighting for. Truth and reconciliation, diversity and inclusion, access to healthcare, our environment and the effect of climate change on it. Be an ally and find a cause you believe in. Pick up their banner and carry it high. Keep it visible. Just like our Indigenous veterans, each of us has different motivations to fight for a cause, but that common spirit of allyship binds us all together. It is comforting to know that when you're struggling, you can look to your right or left and find somewhere there to shore up your flank. Miigwech, Marcy.
Miigwech, Ellen. Thank you for sharing those words about the important role of allyship and lifting each other up, particularly this week, and certainly listening to the stories of our veterans who have been joining us today. So we're nearing the end. We have the distinct pleasure to introduce Farhan Youssef, who is the Executive Director of the Lakehead University Student Union. The entire executive is actually at a national gathering, so they are east of here. And so Farhan has graciously agreed to speak on behalf of the Student Union. So welcome, Farhan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Farhan Youssef. I came to Canada as an international student, graduated from Lakehead University, and settled in Thunder Bay for its pleasant weather. When Denise asked me to speak on the occasion of Indigenous Remembrance Day, I had a long reflection on what I could share. The Indian subcontinent was once ruled by the British. Many men and women from the Indian subcontinent fought in the Great Wars. My grandfather fought for the British Army in Myanmar. He never really spoke about it, but I remember as a kid, he would often scream or cry in his dreams. I never really understood why he would do that. I'd like to share a poem with you all today, written by Solomon Pratt, who is an associate professor at Languages, Linguistics, and Literature at First Nations University of Canada. He wrote the poem both in Cree and in English. We were the forgotten of the lest we forget. We were the invisible ghosts from the res. We had no obligation to join. We had to give up our treaty status. We fought, we died. Our language was used for secret messages. We stood side by side with other soldiers in our victory. We were cast aside when we came back home. We didn't get the benefits allotted other veterans. We didn't know where to live since we gave up our treaty status. We were the forgotten of the lest we forget. We were the invisible ghosts from the res. On behalf of Lakehead University students, I'd like to thank all the veterans for their service. We remember you. Miigwech.